what would you advise policymakers today to do, especially with the affordability crisis, and what change would have the greatest positive impact on affordability and the housing supply?
Well, I do have great news for you. Yesterday, two great things happened. The NAR president, Kevin Brown, testified before Congress, actually, on behalf of NAR members. And so he really was out there advocating on the Hill on a very visible level. And the other good thing that happened is that the 21st Century Road to the Housing Act actually passed, and it's passed both the House and the Senate, and it is headed towards President Trump now to sign. And within that, it actually entails 50 proposals that will actually help both supply, will help affordability, will free up opportunity zones, will free up construction and zoning on a local level, will unlock construction. So when we think about really bringing home buyers into the market, this is something that addresses a multitude of issues.
Hey everybody, this is Jason Ostrowsky, and welcome to another episode of the Everything Real Estate Podcast. Today, I am thrilled to welcome one of the most influential voices in housing economics and real estate research. Her name is Dr. Jessica Lautz. Jessica serves as Deputy Chief Economist and Vice President of Research for the National Association of REALTORS, where she analyzes the trends, data, and market forces shaping housing and homeownership across the United States. A lifelong student of real estate and public policy, Jessica earned her doctorate of real estate from Nottingham Trent University in the United Kingdom, a master's in public policy from American University, and undergraduate degrees in political science and law and justice from Central Washington University. Beyond her work at NAR, Jessica continues to give back as an industry fellow at Nottingham Trent University, mentoring the next generation of real estate professionals. She also serves as committee chair for the National Association of Business Economics and bakes birthday cakes for underserved youth through Cake for Kids and sits on the board of the Food Recovery Network. Is there anything that she can't do? That's incredible. Well, today, we'll discuss the latest housing data, affordability challenges, first-time home buyers, national and local market trends, and what the future may hold for the housing market. So let's dive right into all the data with my special guest today, Dr. Jessica Lautz. I know that there is a lot of consternation in the market right now. We can't make whether it's, up or down, side to side, back and forth. The market is kind of going crazy right now. And my next guest is here to actually settle all the confusion for us, or at least try to settle some of the confusion with hard data. Her name is Dr. Jessica Lautz. She is the Deputy Chief Economist for NAR, and I am thrilled to have her. So, Jessica, if I can call you Jessica, how are you today?
Good. I'm excited to be here. And I don't know if I can make heads or tails of it either. But what I can tell you is what the data is telling me right now.
Well, like we spoke about, I saw you recently out in Harrisburg at our PAR meetings, and you were absolutely phenomenal. The data that you gave out there, the information, I'm like, if I can share this with everybody, this is what we need to do. And so that's the purpose of us being here today. I want to start out by asking if you had an opportunity to give a housing market State of the Union address right now, today, how would you best describe the market nationally to your fellow Americans?
Yeah. So I think when we're talking about the housing market right now, it's an incredibly divided market. We know that it's essentially a K-shaped economy and it's a K-shaped housing market. So we know that those who are on the top end of the spectrum are baby boomers. They're all cash home buyers. They're folks who have a ton of housing equity. That can be one and the same, but it could be a different buyer as well, 3 different buyers in each one of those categories. We also know that the bottom end of the spectrum, the bottom half of the K, are first-time home buyers who are being held back, folks who have student loan debt, folks who are encountering high rent, childcare costs, and all of these issues are really becoming problematic when they reach the housing market and are finding the inventory that they are looking at for a starter level, entry level home is either not available or has a lot of competition.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy out there. I know one of the things that I want to get into with you is the average age not only of the first-time home buyer nowadays, but actually the average age of the move-up buyer. When
Mhm.
you were speaking at our luncheon, I nearly spit out my dinner roll as you were saying what the average age of the move-up buyer was. So it's not just first-time home buyers. The market is just really kind of like you said, that K-shaped market is having its toll taken on pretty much everybody out there. So, despite our best efforts, many consumers are hearing mixed messages about the housing market. I know that personally, when I go out on listing appointments, sellers are still out there thinking that it's 2021, 2022, 2023. What are
Mhm.
the biggest misconceptions buyers and sellers have right now about the market?
Yeah, well, I think that there's a lot of misinformation that's all over social media, honestly, and it's giving really inaccurate information to folks. And they could be homeowners who are sitting on this housing wealth and thinking that tomorrow the housing market is going to crash because they saw something on social media. And so I think that's where it becomes really important to trust the facts and to know where to go with the facts. So that's one of the data points that's out there, is that there's a ton of distressed sales right now. But when we actually look at the data, it continues to be 1 to 2%. But if we go from 1% to 2% of homes are actually a distressed sale, what happens is social media runs with that and says there's 100% increase. Watch distressed sales, they're going up. But really, we know that 40% of homeowners own their home outright. The fundamentals of the market are solid. And we know that homeowners are sitting on a tremendous amount of housing equity because of home price increases. So, looking at that mess information that's out there, I think is really important. And thinking about setting those expectations with sellers that this is not 2020. This is not 2021. Home prices are moving up, but they're not moving up at a 45 or 25% year over year pace. And then also setting expectations with buyers that even though they see on social media, hey, there's tons of housing inventory because the housing market is crashing. Guess what? You're probably going to encounter a housing market where you may actually be one of many bids, depending on that home price and available inventory in that really local market.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I literally was on social media yesterday, and basically my face was turning red listening to this person talking about the foreseeable crash in the real estate market, and we are so not, at least locally where we are so not in that place. And I know that you feel the same way nationally. I want to talk about data points because that's the hard evidence to back up what we're talking about and not social media. So, what data points are you watching most
Mhm.
over the next 12 months that could significantly impact the market nationally, locally? Like, what are some of the headlines or some of the red flags that you're looking for in what you do day to day?
Yeah. So, I mean, on a day to day basis, always interest rates are going to matter to consumers and home buyers, but frankly, they've been pretty flat. They've been in the mid sixes. There really hasn't been much movement there. If anything, they have come down from a year ago, and we're starting to see that actually translate into more activity in the market. Existing home sales were up last month, pending home sales were up. So, signed contracts, but not yet to closing table, were up as well. And so, we're starting to see some optimism there. And I think buyers are reacting to those slightly lower mortgage interest rates, or at least the expectation that they're not going to drop. And so, I think setting that expectation too is very important. The other thing that, of course, is really important right now is looking at inventory. We haven't had a lot of it. And if we look at inventory levels in many local areas, if you have a household income that's $75,000 or below, you're probably going to have a hard time finding a home. Now, that's not universal. Certainly, there's pockets in Pennsylvania where you can have a household income of 50,000 and be able to find a home, not easily, but those properties are out there. And so I think that's where that local data also becomes really important in being that local expert, and the market becomes incredibly important for realtors out there.
I think you bring up such a great point because, I've been working with some buyers for 3 years now. And it's
Mhm.
strictly because every house that comes up in their price range, they either get outbid by cash, someone comes
Mhm.
in with a larger down payment, or it just ends up going way over the asking price. So I just sold a property yesterday. Was listed at $350,000. It sold $75,000 over asking, and so my client that's in the 300s is priced out. And so
Mhm.
I think one of the biggest questions, or one of the most important questions that I can ask you in this podcast today, is my next one. And that is the American dream of home ownership becoming too hard to achieve for the majority of Americans? I really want to just get your take on this, because this is
Mhm.
something that I really care about and really kind of hits home for me when I see some of my clients out there, particularly first-time home buyers, struggling to get their first home and build that generational wealth and start out with that nest egg. How do you feel about the first-time home buyer market and those first-time home buyers? What would you say to
Mhm.
them to give them some hope about
Mhm.
getting their first property?
Yeah, it's difficult. I don't think it's dead, but I think it's incredibly difficult without a lot of financial sacrifices. And financial sacrifices can mean on a personal level, but it also can mean purchasing your first home out of where you actually live. And so thinking about what are you willing to do to actually achieve the American dream of homeownership, part of the American dream of homeownership. And so that becomes very unique, I think, to today's housing market. And if we look at the data, what we can see is that the share of first-time homebuyers is just over 20%. If we look on a national level, on an annual basis, and the age of a first-time homebuyer has jumped to 40 when it used to be historically closer to 30. And so that translates into $150,000 of lost wealth gains. It's a really big problem for that person on an individual level. But if we look at successful first-time homebuyers and how they achieved homeownership, sometimes they teamed up with roommates. Sometimes they teamed up with other family members in a multi-generational home. Other times, if they were able to do so, and I know this is not possible for everyone, it certainly would not have been possible for me, is to move home with friends and family and to skip paying rent. And so as you do that, you're building up your savings to then go into the housing market. And so looking at the financial sacrifices that people are willing to do to come on into homeownership means to me the American dream of homeownership is real. We know from tons of surveys that are out there that people want the American dream of home ownership, but it's just achieving that is becoming and feeling very out of reach for many Americans.
It's funny that you mentioned about moving back home, because when I was in my mid 20s, I bit the bullet. I moved back home. I was running a place. I was very happy. Moved back home. Felt like I was taking 10 paces backwards, and it was brutal, but it did allow me to go rent free, like you said, save my money that was coming in. And that did allow me to buy my first home in my late 20s,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
obviously, there's a path there
Mhm.
potentially for people to take. So, with affordability remaining one of the biggest challenges in the housing market, I just want to give some historical context. How did we get here? And what
Yeah.
are the most realistic solutions? You talked about some of them moving forward, but obviously we need more inventory. Obviously, to meet that demand. How
Mhm.
historically did we get to where we are in this bottleneck right now?
Yeah, it hasn't happened overnight. What really happened is that when we look at building activity, it plummeted during the Great Recession. And following the Great Recession, we really have been lagging in new home builds for an extended period of time. That retracted even further if we think about all of the issues that contractors would have had during the pandemic. So, thinking about building supplies and thinking about contractors and laborers and having the documents to actually purchase the land go through a county office when the county office is closed because of COVID. So we know that that really retracted building activity and slowed it way down too. So the length of time to bring a new build in became much more difficult. At the exact same time, interest rates plummeted, and we saw a lot of people purchase not only a new primary residence, but sometimes a second or even third property with interest rates declining. So those who could jump into the market, who could make a move, did. And so that retracted the inventory level even further. We know the golden handcuffs of those low interest rate mortgages is real. We know that people are not moving as frequently as they had historically. And some of it's interest rates, some of it's the age of home buyers moving up. Essentially, first time home buyers now skipping that starter home because they're moving into that first home as a later age. And also knowing that baby boomers are the biggest share of home buyers nationally. They're more than 40% of the market. And unless they have a really big incentive to move, they're not necessarily going to jump into the housing market today. And of course, capital gains threshold has not been risen since the 1990s as well. And so that's another hesitancy for homeowners to really make that move too. So a lot of reasons, but not a ton of increase in inventory at this moment.
I just had that capital gains conversation with a client literally 2 days ago. And they were very hesitant to move on, but we found them the perfect home. And they did make an offer. We got the property. I found out yesterday, actually last night. We're going to be listing their property coming up. I want to shoot a theory at you. All right. So I have a theory about on the buying side, usually buyers are, if rates are going above 7 right now, at least where we are, buyers are more loath to potentially make offers on property. They can live with the 6s. On the selling side, I find that if they dip into the 5s, they're more likely to list their properties because they know that that 3% interest rate is not coming back anytime soon. Do you feel like I am accurate with that thought? How does the data shape up to what I'm saying about interest rates for sellers and for buyers?
Well, certainly if we saw interest rates at 6, we would see more home buyers. And we've done an analysis on that, actually even down to a local level. So if you want to check that out, shameless plug in our Metro Market Stats dashboard, you can check that out. But what I would say is that at 7, there's a lot of hesitancy. At 6, you see more movement. And it's both affordability, but it's also homeowners. So thinking about a first-time home buyer who suddenly can afford the housing market, but also thinking about that repeat buyer who's saying, yeah, it makes more sense for me. Also, I have a big reason to move, maybe a family change or a long commute. And when rates are at 6, it encourages me a little bit more to make that move. The other thing that I'm going to throw into that equation, though, that I think a lot of homeowners just don't know is housing equity. And I don't think that they necessarily know how much they're sitting on. I don't think that they necessarily know how to obtain it. And I say that a little bit tongue in cheek, but not really, because what we know is that 15% of recent sellers in the last year who are younger boomers had never sold a property. And so this is their first time ever being a home seller. And so do they know how to obtain their housing equity? Do they know what that means? They've just diligently paid their mortgage for all of those years. And so the fear that's out there in the market, I think, is real too.
I think rightfully so, but so much of what we do is education, right? And we have to educate our clients. I know I try my best to send out, market reports, go over and see my clients, talk about equity, talk about what their next steps are. Like you said, if you're living in a property for 40 years, I just sold a property. They were in there for 50 years. They had not bought or sold a property in that long a time. So really had to hold their hand throughout the entire process, which I like doing. I like being that educational source and guiding them the right way. I think that's ultimately the best part of our profession is being able to do your job and do it well for other people and they're happy with your service. So I want to shift to just local market stats if we can. I know you and I talked a little bit about this. I know you were talking about Pennsylvania a couple weeks ago at that luncheon we were at. So locally to where we are in the Northeast, I'm just going to kind of break it down by the Northeast. Are there any housing trends you're seeing that realtors should be paying closer attention to in our local neck of the woods?
Well, I will say it is different everywhere that you're talking about in the Northeast. And so thinking about the Philly market and thinking about a home buyer needing a household income around $90,000 to come into the housing market and be able to afford that with 20% down, and thinking about the housing stock being a little more readily available for a lower income buyer. So not lower income necessarily, but thinking about your school teacher, your first responder, they're probably able to find a property, something that's perhaps overlooked, something that could have a ton of interest, but those properties do pop up in the market. But if we scoot over to New Jersey, New York, your qualifying income is closer to 185. And so thinking about the differences between those local markets is incredibly important. Also knowing that when we look at New Jersey, that continues to have population inflow. And some of that may be from New York, which has been losing population over the course of the last 2 years. But as we look at that, we can see there's so many differences within those areas.
Yeah, there really is. I mean, we talk about Pennsylvania as a whole, but really what we're talking about is southeastern Pennsylvania, the collar counties around Philadelphia, the Lehigh Valley. That's really kind of like our bread and butter marketplace into the Poconos. So really you could break it down, obviously county by county, but also different parts of the states. I know, South Jersey, we always like to kid that, South Jersey is Philly, North Jersey is New York. but I've been told by several people that there is an actual Central Jersey, so I don't want to forget my peeps in Central Jersey there. So looking specifically at the Philadelphia metro area, New Jersey, Delaware markets, what makes our region different from the national level? I mean, we are very stable. I know I've been told, several times you see it borne out in the data that our market in Philly is incredibly stable. We don't have those ridiculous highs. We don't have those ridiculous lows. Do you feel that way as a whole about, Philly, Jersey, Delaware? Do you feel that way as a whole about that region?
I would say that that's true right now, but I do know that during the pandemic, you had a massive inflow of population as people looked to other areas. And as they said, okay, New York City is not the right place for me. Where can I go that's close? And if I need to come back into the city, where can I be? And so that inflow of population certainly happened during the pandemic. And so it did push up home prices a little bit, at least in Pennsylvania, so not completely flat. What I would also say is the Poconos, looking at that vacation area, absolutely gorgeous, but then many of those are second properties that probably were purchased with cash. A lot of them purchased during the pandemic too, and we saw that ramp up in the Poconos activity as well. So again, each area being so completely unique that realtor is working in, and that's where that local expertise becomes so important too.
Yeah, for sure. And I do want to say, obviously we had a huge spike in home prices during the pandemic years. I'm just saying relative in terms to, say, Tampa or Las Vegas or some of those other areas where there was a real boom or bust.
Certainly. Yeah. And in Austin I always love to pick on Austin just because I think it's the worst number that I saw during the pandemic, where they had a 45% increase in home prices year over year. I mean, that's unheard of. So when we see that there's slight home price declines for a very short period, an hour of ramping back up, you can say, yeah, okay, that makes sense, because 45% year over year, it has to settle at some point. That being said, now they're back on the climb.
Yeah. I was talking to actually my conveyancer yesterday, has her son that lives actually in Austin, and we were talking about the market and how crazy it's gone, and then it kind of cooled off, and like you said, now it's kind of coming back again. So, I mean, I guess you never know with the Austin market, keeps you on your toes. If mortgage rates decline over the next year, like going into this year, obviously the war had its effects on the interest rate market, but there were signs at the beginning of this year, at least in our market, that if those rates dipped anywhere into the fives, and they did very briefly, that it was just going to be bonkers this spring. And it was going to feel like one of the years that we had during the pandemic. So if mortgage rates decline over the next year to that level, into the fives, will the market suddenly look like 2020, 2021, 2022 all over again?
I don't know if we're going to have the 2021, 2020 years back. And I don't know if we actually want that
No,
because the intensity in that market was not great for buyers. And certainly I heard from many agents, it wasn't great for them either. I started to hear the term agent fatigue. That being said, if rates hit 5 or dip down to low 6s, I think you could see a lot more activity in the market. And the big thing that we have to remember right now is that demographics are on the side of a really hot market. There's a ton of pent-up demand from young adults. There's a ton of young adults who have been waiting on the sidelines for years, wanting to come into homeownership and really feeling like they've been shut out. And so if rates declined, they would make that move, and you would see home sellers placing their homes on the market too. And so I think you would start seeing that activity in the market. Hopefully not the frenzy of 2020, but certainly I think a more frenzied pace than we are seeing right now.
I've never needed a nap more than those years of 2020, 21, 22. It was, you're right. I do not want to go through that again. I mean, it was great because you were selling property, but you literally had no time to do anything else in your life. So it's all about balance. All right. So if you were advising policymakers, because you are so close to this, and I'm sure you talk to policymakers. I'm sure that you're at high level meetings about policy for housing. What would you advise policymakers today to do, especially with the affordability crisis, and what change would have the greatest positive impact on affordability and the housing supply?
Well, I do have great news for you. Yesterday, two great things happened. The NAR president, Kevin Brown, testified before Congress, actually, on behalf of NAR members. And so he really was out there advocating on the Hill on a very visible level. And the other good thing that happened is that the 21st Century Road to the Housing Act actually passed, and it's passed both the House and the Senate, and it is headed towards President Trump now to sign. And within that, it actually entails 50 proposals that will actually help both supply, will help affordability, will free up opportunity zones, will free up construction and zoning on a local level, will unlock construction. So when we think about really bringing home buyers into the market, this is something that addresses a multitude of issues. And I think it is very, very encouraging. And it is a huge bipartisan effort. And I think that really underscores that both Democrats and Republicans understand this is a massive issue in America, and it is no longer a coastal issue. This is something that is hitting your everyday Americans, and we have to start working on it and start fixing it.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of the largest problems in the country right now, and it's so great to hear that news. Obviously, housing starts, like you had talked about, had waned during the pandemic. We definitely need new housing, and we need to remove those challenges to get it to the buyers out there. So if we invited you back on this podcast 1 year from today, what do you think would be the biggest housing story that we'll be discussing along the way?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think that the biggest housing story, what I would like to see happen, and what Dr. Lawrence Yun has in our forecast, is an increase in home sales activity, an increase in home prices. We're continuing to see that. That has not waned. So we're continuing to see an increase in home prices. I will say that I'm hopeful that first-time homebuyers have an opportunity, especially with the passing of this act, that we can actually see more first-time homebuyers come into the housing market. And if we look at just last month's data, first-time homebuyers on a monthly basis did tick up to the highest level that we've seen since 2020. That's encouraging to me because they have been suppressed for a long period of time. So I really do hope that when we're talking about this a year from now, we can say, look, these things are starting to work. We are starting to see more homebuyers building wealth, working that wealth, and making housing trades too.
Yeah, I would love, I mean, obviously, we'd all love to see that. And, I as we wind down the podcast here, I just want to thank you for coming on, number one. But I always like to end my podcast on an offbeat question. So I read a little bit about you. I know you went to school in the UK. So you went to Nottingham Trent. But that's not the only place because you're a very learned person, which we rarely get on this podcast. So I read that you went and received your doctorate at Nottingham Trent University, a master's from American University, and then an undergraduate degrees from Central Washington University. So my last question to you is, which school had the best mascot? Was it the Trent Tiger, Claude Z. Eagle, or the Central Washington icon himself, Wellington P. Wildcat?
Well, it's probably the Wildcat or the Eagle. I do have an Eagle on my desk here, so it's probably going to be the Eagle. That being said, I don't know if I ever actually attended a game of anything.
You were studying too much, apparently.
So, but Nottingham Trent scones in the UK, so I'm going to go 10 out of 10 on their scones.
And I know you go back a fair amount. Is that right?
So when I was in school, I was working at NAR, and so I did travel on the weekend. I would take a red eye on Thursday. I'd be in class on Friday and Saturday, and then I'd fly back on Sunday. But I only had to do that 6 or 7 times, and then my graduation. So over a 3-year period.
Yes. That's really cool. Well, listen, thank you for your time. I really appreciate the data, the information. This is great for our agents to hear. And hopefully I will see you again at a luncheon soon and I can come and say hi to you.
That would be great.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lautz. Appreciate your time. That was the conversation with Dr. Jessica Lautz. We thank her for the great information that she provided for this episode. To end this podcast, I would like to give an update on the 21st Century Road to Housing Act that was passed in both chambers of Congress with overwhelming support by both Republicans and Democrats. But before that bill could become law, President Trump abruptly canceled a scheduled signing ceremony for the historic housing package, stating on social media that he will withhold his signature until Congress passes the Save America Act. This does not doom the legislation, however, and if the president does not sign or veto the bill within 10 days, excluding Sundays, while Congress is in session, the bill will automatically become law. That 10-day window started yesterday, June 29th, 2026, and hopefully this bill will indeed become law and help us in the housing market. Well, that's it for the podcast this week. We will be back in another couple of weeks with a new topic, a new guest, and as always, if you want to hear a topic that we haven't covered yet, please reach out to me, jason.ostrowsky@foxroach.com, and if you haven't liked or subscribed to the podcast or checked us out on YouTube, please do so. It helps us to reach more people. Once again, this is Jason Ostrowsky saying stay safe out there, stay selling, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Everything Real Estate Podcast.